but his chiddush is that the rabbis are being loving. That's the point you're making, basically.
Right.
It's really out of love, out of concern, and there's value to both. Parshat Naso, and our commentator today is the Ishbitzer, Rabbi Wiener.
And now we are welcome right after Shavuos to the longest Torah portion in the Chumash, 176 Psukim, Parshas Naso. A very wide variety of topics covered in this parsha. Our piece today will center on two of the most famous topics, the topic of the Saita and of the Nazir and their relationship to each other. But just very briefly, the Saita is a married woman who has been accused by her husband of secluding herself with a man who is not her husband. Whether or not adultery occurred or did not occur is not even of import over here. That's a separate thing. And so she's brought to the authorities, so to speak, and they interrogate her to a certain extent, and then there's a test. There's a test given, and one of the reasons this test was not a lie detector test of sorts. It was a kind of a mystical, spiritual test, whereby she was given a certain drink, a potion, and basically, if she was telling the truth, she after she drank this potion, she was blessed with all kinds of blessings, and she was reunited with her husband, and everybody lived happily ever after. If she was unfortunately not telling the truth, and something not good occurred, then it resulted in punishment. In the Chumash, in our Torah portion, immediately following a description of the Saita procedure, we have a new mitzvah, an individual who is known as a Nazir. Samson, Shimshon was probably the most famous Nazir. This is an individual, it could be a man, woman, who Shimshon was from birth, but I can volunteer to become a Nazir. That means for a particular amount of time, I refrain from doing certain things. I refrain from drinking alcohol or products that could be mixed up with alcohol. I don't allow myself to become spiritually impure by being with spiritually a corpse or something like this, and I don't get a haircut for that period of Nazirut of the Naziras. And this was a type of a situation where a person would take upon himself these strict
limitations,
because he wanted to remove. It was kind of like an aesthetic situation where a person wanted to remove himself a little bit away from society and the goings on. And this is the Nazir. So in the Torah, we're taught about the Saita, and then we're taught about the Nazir.
That's right. And the Ishbitzer is going to claim and discuss how it's meaningful, the order in which they appear. First, they give us this story, they give us this story. There's a way that they talk to one another, and so we'll go there. And before we do that, as usual, quick announcements. We have a source sheet for those of you who are want to follow the actual text of the commentary of the Ishbitzer. And you can go to our website, HebrewLearningCircles.org. The source sheet is on the website. What you go is you go to the Jewish resources on our website. Then you go to Parsha videos, and that's it. That's where it is. So there's the source sheet, and there's the verse. And while you're on the website, I want to also invite you to please browse and check out the other resources and programs by Hebrew Learning Circles, especially the Bar and Bat Mitzvah Simple Meaningful program that we're very proud of, both online and in person if you're in the New York area. Also, Hebrew Learning Circles, that's Hebrew School for children, etc. So, finally, if you are interested in joining a Q&A, a live discussion with Rabbi Sofer and myself after this presentation, so we have we can get you into a meetup.com room, and we would open that up for a live conversation. If you're interested in that, reach out to us. We'd love you to subscribe and like as usual. So the pasuk, the verse in Parshat Naso that is the first pasuk of the paragraphs on the sota, the adulterer. It goes like this: Daber bnei Israel, v'amarta alehem, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, this is God speaking to Moses, a man whose wife has gone astray and has betrayed him. And as Rebelli explained, this is a suspicion. We're not talking about, we don't know whether this happened or not. Everything is very ambiguous there. But the point is, as we will see with the Sota, is with the Ishbitzer, is that this is a situation where one needs to really examine oneself. It's a metaphor for a situation where one needs to really examine oneself if what I'm doing is right, and he'll make that point.
That the word sight is an interesting word. There are two possible strict definitions of this word. One is, as you said, as a Taichit here, to go astray, to turn. It means to take a turn away.
Yeah, off the direct.
Turn off the path. Mm-hmm. But it's also comes from Lashon shtuyot, which means foolish.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why these definitions coincide, because it's ultimately foolish in the long term for a person to give up the long-term goals just for the sake of a short-term benefit of satisfying some base desire. So there's something going on with the word itself is saita, in case people are wondering.
No, absolutely. The Chazal, I think Rashi says that it's, or there's some other source where it says that adultery can only happen if somebody loses their mind. There's a compassion for that, for the human impulse to, kind of lose sight of the bigger or the spiritual picture and get caught up in a momentary distraction. So there's a bit of a compassion for that. On the other hand, it's such a grievous. I mean, it's a source of so much trouble, especially between man and wife. Husband and wife. So in some way, so it's very loaded. It's very loaded. But so that's good to consider as a backdrop as we go into this picture. And he says this, but Torah ne'emar parashat sota v'achar kach parashat nazir. This picture says, look, in the Chumash, first you have the story of the adulteress, and then you have the story of the Nazir. Could be, you could say, the ascetic or the monk. The Nazir is kind of like it's not exactly a monk. A Nazir does not swear for celibacy, but it's the same thing. It's somebody who denies himself the pleasures of life. I'm not going to get into the details for the sake of the whole sake of God. So it's kind of like elevating oneself and becoming into that level of monk like lifestyle for a period of time. ובגמרא מסודר נזיר קודם סוטה. And he says, look, it's interesting. When you look in the Talmud, first you get, it relates to sota, and then first it relates to nazir, to the monk, and then to sota, to the adulteress.
Right. So just for people to put that in context very quickly, we have our Chumash, that's called the Torah Sheb'Ksav, the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and then by extension the complete 24 books of the Bible, what would be called the Bible. That's called the Torah Sheb'Ksav, written down Torah.
Right.
Simultaneously, there was given to the Jewish people something called the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah,
right.
The traditions that come from Moshe and Har Sinai and other things. Altogether, we call it the Torah Shebaal Peh, because originally it was supposed to be memorized and handed down orally. Eventually, it got written down. Now, in the 6 orders of the Mishnayos, which is the basis for the Torah Shebaal Peh, in the order called Nashim, the order that deals with a lot with things that have to do with relationships with women, etc., there are 7 books in there. And it goes in an order. Shishay, Sidra, Mishnah.
Yeah.
And so interestingly, the Ishbitzer points out, I never thought of this before. It's so obvious. Why? He's asking a good question, a Jewish question.
Yeah.
Why? It goes Nazir Saita. First, the sages of the oral Torah tell us of all the very, very detailed circumstances about the aesthetic. Then it first goes into Saita. Now, this is not just random.
Yeah.
But I never even thought.
I know. It's interesting because he doesn't go to the substance of what the stories are. He goes to the issue of the order and the way there's a difference between the rabbis of the oral Torah that come later and the written Torah that comes earlier.
Right.
And that's meaningful in his little advar here. We'll see.
Okay, let's see how.
What he says. But thank you for that context, because I think it's helpful for people to understand that the Mishnah and the Talmud is actually, it takes all the materials in the Torah, but orders them according to topics. Right. And but it orders it here in the reverse than the way it appears in the Torah itself.
Right.
So
and if you're going to switch that kind of a thing around, there has to be a meaningful reason for that. They're not going to just
right. So now here he says, "Hines sota morash adam yabit bechesronot," and he says, so what's the meaning of this whole story of sota? Generally speaking, without getting into the details, this is it symbolizes a person who needs to examine themselves. Right, yabit b'chasono. A person needs to take a look at his shortcomings. That's why I said before, there's both the man and the woman. They're both actually kind of in this kind of, they're not perfect, kind of situation. It's everybody there, everybody in that situation is dealing with some kind of deficiency. The man is having some kind of overblown jealousy. The woman is having, who knows what she's having. And so how do you negotiate that? They have to go to the priest. There's got to be a third party who's also from a higher level.
Correct.
It can't just be negotiated. It's not, oh, honey, let's sit down and talk. This is beyond that.
Right. This
is not just, oh, let me see. It's not a minor examination. This is, I think, there's an intensity to it. This is a serious examination. The Sota talks about the times in life where we know we're completely off the path. Like something is really wrong. It's something foundational spiritually. This is not just minor little, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot this, or or whatever. So he says, okay, so that is that place where we need to examine and see how we're doing. And then when after a person examines, a person needs to set limits upon oneself. And that is the meaning of the next story, right? So now I know that I've strayed, and what do I want to do? I want to create some kind of limits, boundaries, guardrails, so this doesn't happen again.
The Ishbitzer is bringing Chazal. This is a very famous idea. We see first the Saita, and then we see the story of the Nazir. And our sages teach us openly that this is to teach us that what did that guy who wants to be a Nazir all of a sudden see? He saw the humiliation. He saw what happens to a person when they go off track.
Right.
How low they can sink.
Right.
Morally and ethically and spiritually. And he says, whoa, I'm going to build fences around myself so that I never even get close to a situation which can lead me down that path.
Right.
I don't need that at all. And then we find out about the Nazir and his stringencies that he takes upon himself.
That's right.
So that's the simple thing. And we see that. That's why Saita, then Nazir, as a response to Saita.
That's right. So that's the logic. The logic is I'm falling, and this is the solution. I'm putting guardrails, and I'm going to create a lifestyle that protects me from temptation, protects me from distraction or losing my way.
Right.
And then he will understand the words of Torah that he needs in order to create the limitations, the gader, the fences around himself. ואחר כך נכתב בתורה סוטה ואחר כך נזיר. ועל כן, ועל כן נכתב בתורה סוטה ואחר כך נזיר. And this is the reason for the order. First sota and then nazir. Ki be'emet, and I was going to bring a reference, a textual reference from Gittin from the Gemara, and he says, because in truth, as it says in the Gemara, ein adam omed al dvar Torah ela im ken nechshal bahem. That's interesting. That's the Ishbitzer. He says he's quoting the Gemara where there's. It says a person does not understand words of Torah until a person fails it.
There's two rabbis arguing over there, Rabbi Bar Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, and one of them gives his explanation. The other guy hammers him, which is very common in the Gemara. He hammers him. He says, no, boom, 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 knocks his logic out of the park. And Bar Rav Huna says, Hadar, he retracted. And he says, whoa, you got me, man. You're right. And then he says, he brings a pasuk from the Navi, and he says these words, I could only come to the emes through messing up.
Right. I could only understand this by actually failing to understand it first.
Exactly, which is a beautiful idea.
That's right. And this is, but he's going to...
go a different way, but that's what
he's going to show another option now. But it's a beautiful idea, but also a daring idea for, Ishbitzer was known for being daring, for being, kind of saying things that, most people just don't want to go there. Anyway, and he's saying, okay, so sure, a person has to be aware. I mean, he could be saying two things. I'm not exactly, but he's saying either a person needs to be aware of the transgression first, and then create the fences around himself, or a person needs to actually fail and then come to realize the truth. Probably both. Yeah. Okay, so he continues. Aval chachamenu zichronam livracha nikru Torat imcha. The sages were called by Rashi the Torah of your mother. And now this is, as you explained before, these are the sages of the oral Torah. And Rashi says that in Mishlei there we read that Torah Avicha, the Torah of your father, is the Torah of the Torah, the written Torah, and the Torah of your mother is the oral Torah. That's how the verse is explained.
Siddur in the beginning, in the morning part of the Siddur, it says Shema b'ni Musar Avicha. You should listen. King Solomon is giving advice. You should listen. Technically, he's talking about your mother, your parents. Mm-hmm. You should listen to the lectures that your father gives you.
Right.
And alti taish Torah simecha, and the instruction. Torah really means an instruction. And the lessons that you learn from your mother, you shouldn't push them to the side. Basically, he's telling you to listen to your parents.
That's right.
But Rashi right there, you're correct. Rashi right there says this is all a mashal and a metaphor.
Metaphor.
Shema b'ni Musar Avicha means the Torah Shebiksav, the written Bible, and Alti Toish Torah Simecha, the mother, means the sages.
That's right. The Mishnah Gemara, etc.
Yeah, the Torah Shabbat, which fits beautifully into this difference of order that he wants to explore.
That's right. So he says, he says, the sages, they love people and they want to make sure that people are okay. They're desiring people's well-being. So they reverse the order. They put the Nazir, the monk, before the Sota, the adulteress. Hainu, Shadam Yazir Atzmo Batchila, Terem Shikashel B'dvar Torah. Why? Because they want a person to set the guardrails first before the person stumbles over the teaching of the Torah.
Right? I'm just thinking in my mind, when you just said that, it brought to mind, you're walking in the park and you come to a pond or riverbed, and you say, "Ooh, maybe I'd like to go for a swim." So the people in charge know that it's a little bit dangerous to swim there. It's a little bit deep in the middle.
Yeah.
But their philosophy is, you know what? If someone wants to take a chance, push you in and learn how to swim. Sometimes the father will say, push you in, learn how to swim, sink or swim,
Yeah.
and then they'll get it,
Yeah.
But other people say, whoa, we have to put a sign here. Be careful. It's dangerous.
Yeah. Out of compassion for the person, so they don't get in trouble.
So the Torah Biksav is saying, oh, you want to get involved? You want to go off? Okay, you'll see what happens. And then you'll have to backtrack and figure it all out. But the sages come along and say, whoa, I've empathy, compassion. I see what's really going on with people. Let's set up, warning signs and guardrails.
And save you the trouble. It should be enough for the person to look at the Parsha of Sota, Haneimar B'Torah, which is in the Torah. So it should be enough for a person they don't have to experience the transgression. It's enough for them to just read about it. And just from reading about it, just like you said, just like read the sign and then understand, that you don't have to go there. And the person should not learn from their fumbling over.
Right. I'm also thinking, because a lot of people have an idea, you hear this sometimes, this concept of asusiag l'Torah, rabbinic. So a lot of people, you hear people say, well, I listen, if it says it in the Torah, I listen. But if the rabbis come along and make all these rules upon rules upon rules, they're making me crazy already. Mind your own business. Why are you so strict? What the Torah says is enough. I don't need rabbis to come along and give me more things to do and not do. You hear that a lot. So, and there's, we could argue that and debate that. Why, what, how? But I think he's providing an answer. He's saying you're looking at it completely wrong. They didn't come to make things harder for you.
Yeah. It was from compassion. Yeah.
Out of compassion, to make it easier for you to stay within in the circle.
Yeah. And but his chiddush is that the rabbis are being loving. That's the point you're making, basically.
Right.
It's really out of love, out of concern. And, there's value to both. There's value to going through the hardship yourself and learning, and there's value to being a caring parent and wanting to shield and, give a Torah that's makes life a little easier on a spiritual level. I want to be really clear. When I read this, I'm remembering he's not talking about day-to-day living. He's talking about the spiritual well-being of a person or the spiritual path of a person. The reason I say it is because sota, this is clearly brought to the Kohen. This is not like just a little, let's negotiate a little conflict here. This is like, it's brought to the Kohen. That means this is an issue of one's neshama, one's ability to be connected to the Creator, to God. And he shows how both, I think, how both are true. If a person needs to grow in through stumbling and through making one's own errors, but a person also doesn't want to get lost. A person doesn't want to get cut off spiritually. And this is not only about the love of the rabbis, but it's about the wisdom of the rabbis. We don't have to figure everything out by ourselves. We can lean into the wisdom of the ages. Mm. The rabbis made the mistakes. They're not. This is not just sitting down with like an engineer at a drawing board. I mean, the Chazal are sort of like the next generation after the Chumash, and they're saying, listen, this is our accumulated wisdom. I mean, we've swum to the middle of the pond too many times, and we're giving you the what we learned, so you don't have to. So there's something beautiful about that, leaning back into our ancestors and the wisdom of the sages, and saying, yeah, I need to learn by myself, but that's what I have Torah Sheba'al Peh for. That's what I have the sages for.
Right, exactly. And that gets back to that Gemara, the humility of the sages. Rava bar Rav Huna, this is a very public, these disputes were very public. All the students were there, the next generation of students, next generation, all the way down to today. We read this today, 2,000 years, 1,500 years after this was codified in the Talmud, and we see Rava bar Rav Huna getting hit, and then he turns around and goes say, you know what, I was wrong.
Yeah.
This is what I said was basically illogical.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't just say that, okay, you're right. He says, you know what? I was nichshel. Yeah. I stumbled in my thinking process.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing, and that was for us, for our benefit too.
And may we all be blessed with, navigating our need to learn everything by ourselves with our need and capacity to lean into the sages and learn from the past and find our way, B'ezrat Hashem. And so with that, we're going to conclude today. Again, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Come back next Wednesday. We look forward to seeing you, and shalom for now. Ayim rabim lo yuchlu